Hello.
Our story begins inside of Darth Vader's meditation chamber, where he is confronted with a new sickening reality. Visions for the apprentice Sidious hadn't been this intense since prior to Order 66. The nightmares of Padmé's death were mastered manipulation utilized by Palpatine to turn Anakin into Vader. These techniques had been used to lesser degrees throughout the years as an apprentice. Sometimes the Force would reward Anakin with troubling visions. But ever since Cloud City, everything changed. Darth Vader found himself longing for his own apprentice, for the first time in perhaps his entire existence as Vader. There was something so sickening about knowing that Sidious could strip him of anyone or anything he cared about. In that, Vader decided it would be best to protect himself by refusing that sort of connection in his life. He was right for doing it, at least he believed so internally, because he didn't have to lose someone like Padmé again. That was perfectly fine with him until it came to learning about Luke Skywalker, his son. Their fates were inextricably tied together, and they happened to cross paths on the Death Star 4 years before. Now, after a troubling duel on Bespin, Vader couldn't help but long for his son to transform into a dark apprentice, to become the Sith he never could be. These were true aspirations until today. Like the Force did with his mother, before the beginning of the Clone Wars, the Force would trouble him. Vader existed frequently inside of his own mind. There wasn't much that excited him outside of his head. Imperial officers were always tools, and they frequently disappointed him. So Vader, as he usually did, sat inside his flagship, inside his meditation chambers. No one would be interrupting him. Sidious made sure of that. Everything was underway at the moment for the final battle of the Galactic Civil War. The Emperor was leading the rebels to Endor to have them crushed in front of the second Death Star. Vader's position right now was simply monitoring locations just within hyperspace range of Endor. The officers handled that. Vader was in a different plane of existence. His mind was focused on the Force, and he found himself in this dreadful state of longing. He wished for his son to be by his side. Long had he left his yearning for Padmé behind. As a Sith, he couldn't let that consume him. He always loved her, but she infrequently plagued his thoughts. Luke, though, changed all of that. Sometimes when he'd dream, it'd be him, Padmé, and Luke on Naboo, talking about Luke's grand adventures. Luke's Bespin outfit was quite frequent in these dreams. Sometimes it'd be the farm boy outfit that was on the Death Star. In this particular vision, it was nothing like that. Luke was dressed more similarly to Anakin's old self, the Jedi Knight that turned his back on the Jedi Order. He was covered in black robes, his lightsaber hilt resembled Obi-Wan's, and he was more stoic. Vader watched from afar, as if he wasn't even there, but he could hear his master. Sidious was laughing, blasting electricity from his wrinkly ends. His yellow teeth glimmered with each flash. Luke was on the ground, reeling, crying out, and no one was coming to save him. Vader reached his hand out to save his son, but a stub appeared. His armor, the suit he hated but wore with strength, vanished from around his body. He was so powerful, but all of that power meant nothing. Even with Palpatine's back turned, there was nothing he could ever do to stop his evil master. Sidious turned back towards Vader and reminded him that there could only be two, a master and an apprentice. Luke cried out once again, begging his father for help, but Sidious told the foolish Jedi Knight that no one could save him. Palpatine's hand flung backwards and Vader, now fully without his suit and only a tunic covering his body, flung into the wall. Without legs or arms like his Mustafar self, he was paralyzed, forced to watch every agonizing second of his son's death. Luke was brutally burned until he was consumed by the Force itself. Vader's eyes shot open and he fell backwards, tumbling over his chambers and indenting part of the wings. He turned over and reached for his helmet before putting it back over his head, but that perhaps made things worse. Without the mask, his heavy breathing and anxious movement was hidden. With the helmet, it became so visible and audible. The apparatus heaved with every aching breath, and his mask bobbed in realization. It was all a dream, but like it had been with Padmé, it was a sign of what was to come. In the situation with his wife, he tried to be calm and collected, but he damned her to die all alone on Polis Massa. His son would face a similar fate because he couldn't be strong enough. A sickening thought ran through his head as he clenched his fist on the floor, bending the metal ground under the weight of his own metallic fingers. Using what strength he could, he shoved himself off the floor and looked around the room. It was silent and dark, without a window, just as he preferred. Vader was just where he wanted to be. This vision wouldn't continue in any other way. His hand rested on the side of the meditation chamber itself, and he looked down. He mouthed the word beneath his helmet, but not a sound came out. He promised himself and his wife that he would save their son. Vader's own motivations to have his own rule of two, to create his own empire with his son by his side, were thrown out in an instant. He loathed the idea of losing Luke to the Sith way, and there was something so ironic about how this played out. Vader had to recognize, and he could not deny, the parallel. Shmi and Padmé had died from his visions, and now at his strongest and most powerful self, he felt more powerless than the Padawan who slaughtered the Tusken Raiders. He could obtain every ounce of darkness from his evil master, but it was abundantly clear that he wouldn't and couldn't stop Luke from dying by following the same path he went before. Vader was desperate almost instantaneously. He needed to try anything to save his son, and that started with the location. He saw the Emperor's throne room inside the Death Star. He knew where everything would happen, and he would stop his son from ever reaching the battle station, even if it meant sabotaging the Empire itself. Turning on the galactic regime wasn't something that conflicted Lord Vader. However, making sure he effectively did it without drawing suspicion was the difficult part. The Emperor was frequently paranoid. Those inside his inner circle had been with him for decades, like Masameda, who still served him on Coruscant. These were lifelong supporters of Palpatine, and he preferred that. As long as they didn't challenge his authority, he didn't care. They were as useful as they were loyal. Vader understood that to stop the Emperor from hurting his son, he needed to change some things, and it started with the Bothan spies. A message that Palpatine allowed the Alliance to get access to was changed last second, without the Emperor's knowledge. The intel provided Alliance leadership with knowledge of the shield generator on the surface of the planet, with additional information that would change everything. Thanks in part to Imperial officer Tian Jerjad, the station commander of the Death Star, the rebels would have a 30-minute period to jump into the Endor system to destroy the super weapon. As Jerjad provided, the rebels would be granted protection from the Imperial fleet. The message crafted by Vader explicitly told them that the Imperial fleet stationed at Endor was positioned out of the way. It was meant to be a trap. The 30-minute time gap would be during the Emperor's arrival, a way to kill him and get out, with the destruction of the Death Star. It was the perfect chance to end the war and for Vader to protect his son. Alliance leadership was very skeptical, but because it was the station commander of the weapon, they had to trust it. Thanks to Vader, he completely removed himself by the equation by throwing Jerjad under the bus, and also, the shield generator would be genuinely disabled by an EMP burst from the Forest Moon, planted by a Gong droid Vader reprogrammed. It was a part of a supply drop for the generator, so it all worked out perfectly. Due to their desperation, the rebels would take the bait, and instead of speeding towards the Death Star with their main fleet, they'd head in with a fighter fleet, led by General Solo. With Generals Calrissian, Syndulla, and Skywalker in their crew, they would drop out of hyperspace with X-Wings, Y-Wings, B-Wings, and A-Wings. The Empire would be completely caught off guard by it, and upon their arrival, the EMP burst would activate. Everything was timed, so Vader instructed the rebels to be at Endor for a specific planetary rotation time. They showed up a couple milliseconds early, but that actually worked in aid to Vader's personal case more. Vader was stationed inside of Admiral Piet's flagship, the Executor. The Emperor arrived earlier in the day and was currently stationed inside of the throne room. Vader watched the point defense systems on the Super Star Dreadnought activate, but the Millennium Falcon buzzed the bridge without firing a shot. Inside the Corellian fighter, the cannons on the top and bottom were Leia and Lando. Trailing right behind them were the Ghost and Red 5. Luke could sense his father watching him from the bridge of the ship, and he, believing Vader would chase them into the tunnel, would stay behind to lead his father off. The Death Star, with Commander Jerjad in charge, ordered all available TIE fighters into action. Due to the attack coming as such a surprise, no one was ready. The pilots were sleeping and rushed from their chambers to enter their fighters. Some pilots were happily on patrol, but A-Wing interceptors dealt with them almost instantly. Luke and Rogue Squadron took out some loose Imperial vessels trying to counter. Without really any struggle, the Millennium Falcon would dart through the massive chambers within the Death Star, because the shield generator was already shut down. The Emperor in his throne room was hailed by his royal guards, who were informed by Jar Jar first, secondly by Vader, whose excuse was that he believed the shield generator was still operable. It was a masterful gambit, and so close was he to freedom for himself and his son. Thanks to the timing of everything, Piet had no reason to check the shields of the Death Star. Due to the proximity alert of the fighter fleet exiting hyperspace inside the bridge of the Executor first, Piet wasn't inclined to keep an eye on the shields of the Death Star. He also, foolishly but also fairly, prepped the defenses of the Executor, hence why no one inside the bridge noticed the EMP blast that hit the shield generator. This, for Emperor Palpatine, was a sign that Tien Jar Jar could be a traitor. Sidious almost told Vader to chase, but he recognized that without the shields and an unprepared defense fleet, the Death Star was pretty much already a loss. They rushed Palpatine from the throne room to a hidden hangar bay attached to the tower of the chambers. As the rebels slipped into the reactor holder, torpedoes launched from their bays and ripped into the side of the actual reactor. Explosions started to sprout out as ties from opposing corridors arrived, just in time to be incinerated. The rebel fighter fleet turned around with the Falcon following closely behind. Leia stood behind Han as he and Chewie bounced the vessel masterfully through the scaffolding as the closing-in explosion covered the sides of the viewport. Luke gave out the command to disperse the fighter fleet and prepare for the jump to hyperspace. Just following the Emperor's escape from the Death Star, Commander Jar Jar jumped ship, utilizing an escape pod. He would dock with the Executor before the reactor explosion killed off another several 100,000 Imperials who called the second Death Star their temporary home. The rebel fighters slipped away from the detonation that encompassed pretty much everything, and they blew the thing so that they could go home. Han gave a little wave as he passed by the Executor before following the rebels in the hyperspace. The explosion of the Death Star damaged the Executor terribly, damaging its engines, shields, and nearly destroying half of its hull. Vader waited for his master in the main hangar bay, where Commander Jar Jar's escape pod landed. The Emperor wasn't very giddy when he landed and got off the Imperial shuttle. His eyes first looked to Vader, demanding a full answer. Lord Vader was truthfully annoyed that his master survived, but his son wouldn't have to face the throne room of the Death Star. That was at least a temporary victory. He told his master everything he had seen from his perspective. He told him about the rebel fleet arriving, then the shield generator EMP blasting moments later, and the clear survivor, who managed to miss his rendezvous with his rebel allies. Vader framed everything to blame the destruction of the Death Star on Jar Jar. The Emperor turned to the officer, who tried to explain everything, but Sidious heard so little before he snapped the man's neck and demanded an instant return to Coruscant. Vader nodded, moving to the bridge and informing Piet. They'd have to change ships and leave, which made Palpatine even more joyful. The Executor also wasn't the only vessel damaged by the explosion. About half of the destroyers faced some type of damage. It was a tightly condensed fleet, with little maneuverability, which was not beneficial for them. Throughout the trip through hyperspace and eventually their arrival over Coruscant, the Dark Lord of the Sith would speak extensively to his apprentice. The data leak that went with the Bothan spies was clearly a mistake on his part, and he didn't plan to repeat it. The Emperor didn't really care how it happened, but he wanted Skywalker dead. Vader understood that it had been their directive to abduct him and turn him to the dark side, but why kill him? Sidious nodded his head, walking past his apprentice. Killing Luke Skywalker was not about revenge. It was about loyalty. Vader bowed to his master, who didn't even look in his direction. Sidious wanted full proof from his apprentice that he wasn't the culprit behind the attack on the Death Star. Vader had made a quite drastic decision by betraying the Emperor. Obviously, the similarity of losing his mother and Padmé through visions was haunting him, but he never expected Palpatine to escape the Death Star. Sidious was deathly serious too. He wanted Vader to return to the Imperial Palace with proof of Luke's murder. Palpatine longed for a stronger apprentice, one with the capability of a real person, not just a machine. But because Vader could be a potential culprit, due to Sidious refusing to trust anyone, he needed to be tested again. There was nothing crueler than forcing Vader to murder his own son. In a way similar to having Dooku kill Asajj, this was a test of loyalty. Even to Palpatine's surprise, Vader did not rebel at this or even try and stand up for his son. They both knew their entire relationship was reliant on this action, so Vader did as he believed was necessary and departed from Coruscant to begin the hunt for his son. Luckily, before the destruction of the Death Star, the Alliance amassed outside of Sullust, so they should technically be in that area. Vader would have to search for the longer part of the week to find his son. During this time, his visions of Luke's death continued to multiply. Some would show a firing squad, others were full-on executions, but they progressively got harder for Vader to endure. Watching what he believed was his only living family member die multiple ways every night was haunting. It made the little skin he had left on his body tremble and crawl, and it pressed more human emotions into him, like anxiety, depression, and potentially most important to this specific circumstance, grief. Vader needed these, not because they were good, but they connected him back to Anakin Skywalker himself. He didn't find his son. In all actuality, it was the other way around. However, while Vader was looking for Luke, he was monitoring another situation, utilizing the command code of another Imperial officer, not even someone worth naming, because they were just another useless worker bee. Vader used the Force to pull their command cylinder from their pocket while passing by before leaving Coruscant. Regardless, Luke was patrolling outside the fleet, and actually shot his father out of the sky. Vader was utilizing a Lambda shuttle, so it would be a lot easier to target him. It was another very happy landing for Vader, on another volcanic world. Mustafar's environment was constantly changing, but Sullust frequently had its volcanoes and lava fields. Vader's shuttle actually landed in lava, which Luke wasn't intending to do. When he landed Red 5 with R2, Luke watched his father storm out of the river and face him. Skywalker instinctually gripped his lightsaber and ignited the emerald blade. Molten lava dripped off his father's suit, one protected from fire ever since his little incident 23 years beforehand. Vader's breathing apparatus steadied itself out, and Luke asked his father what he was doing out here, without support. He struggled to find the words. Ever since his first vision, a little more than a week ago, he'd been trying to figure out what he would say to his son. And here, the words were stuck inside his head. Vader, instead of hiding the truth, decided to be totally honest with his son because that's what Luke needed the most. If he accepted him or not, then that was up to him. But this was the most desperate Vader had ever been since becoming this machine. He told his son that the data leak from the Bothans came from him. He sabotaged Commander Jar Jarrod so that the rebels could have a fighting chance. The Emperor planned on the Battle of Endor, destroying the Alliance, and Vader stopped it. Not because of some righteous reasoning, and Vader confessed that, but because he needed to save his son from what appeared to be certain death. Luke's face contorted in a puzzled expression as Vader continued further. He explained that in his time, as a young man, he experienced visions about Luke's grandmother's death and Luke's mother's death. The first time, he was too late to save Luke's grandmother, Shmi. The second time, he wasn't powerful enough to save Luke's mother, Padmé. And this time, after having failed twice, he recognized that no matter how much power he had, he couldn't prevent it with raw strength. Vader had no clue if Luke wanted to save him, or found it within himself to forgive him, but he did not want his son to die, and that's what he told him right here. To Vader's great surprise, Luke believed every single word. Maybe it was naivety, or foolish, but he believed that Anakin Skywalker, his father, still lived. He had recently made it his mission to save the man. He smiled and remarked that it seemed Anakin had done it himself. But that still didn't answer the question. Why was he on Sullust? Luke could tell his father wasn't here because of the Alliance, so what gives? Vader explained that he came out here to find Luke, to make a deal with him. The Emperor was demanding more loyalty, and the only way to prove that was by bringing in proof of his son's death. Luke's saber was still ignited, and he gripped it a little harder, just in case his father was going to attack him. Vader continued though, explaining that he wanted to borrow his son's lightsaber as proof. Originally, he was going to use something else, like the metallic hand or maybe a blaster, but having seen the lightsaber, it was the easiest solution. Luke, without even saying a word, extinguished the saber and flipped it, before handing it over to his father. Vader looked at the weapon, recognizing its source inspiration. Old Obi-Wan left quite a mark on his son. It showed through the saber. Luke told his father to promise him one thing, and Vader looked up. Luke asked that he find his peace. Without saying another word, young Skywalker turned around and abandoned Sullust. Perhaps it was a bit of a stiff conversation, but it was the first true moment between Luke and Anakin. Luke wanted to believe in who his father could be, but that all needed to come from within. Luke couldn't do that for Anakin. which is why he left so unceremoniously. He finished their conversation with truth, because he wanted his father to have his peace, and to live in it for just a moment if that's all he could have. Those final words were what sat with Vader all the way from the lava fields to a shuttle he bought back to Coruscant. It firstly was a confirmation that Luke loved his father, which gave him profound joy and peace alone. It was also a wake-up call in its own right, outside of the visions. It was a message to Vader that he needed to destroy his demons, conquer them, and rise above them. He had to stop Sidious and the Empire and everything else it controlled, while Vader had been working on his own little plan since coming out to look for his son. There had been millions of people that died on the second Death Star, not to mention injuries and deaths outside in the collision with the Imperial fleet. Most of the people in the Endor system were contract workers, hired to do a job because of their poor financial situations. The Empire exploited them, and now they were all dead. Some of these people were absolutely evil, let's not misconstrue that, but others just wanted to provide for their families. It depended on the individual case, but in the end, those people had families. Vader was able to use some familiar tools to gather the names of every single person related to someone who died over Endor, and sent out a message to every single one of them. It was a written email type of message. No officer would reward the family with a banner for their loved one's sacrifice. The Emperor did not mention the losses. It was just silence. No one knew that 2 million people died on the second Death Star alone, or that another one was being built to begin with. Before ever leaving Sullust, this batch email was sent out to over 5 million people, and they were just as happy as one would expect them to be. Their loved one died. Their friends, family, fathers, daughters, sons, and mothers just gone. Nothing to repay those losses. So by the time Vader arrived on Coruscant, the Imperial Palace was surrounded by protesters. Most people in the city itself didn't know about the incident. Word of mouth definitely traveled, but silence from the media left many refusing to believe the truth. Families wanted the truth. They wanted to know that their people did not die in vain. Vader's vessel cruised above the protesters, and it landed inside the palace hangar bay. He exited with his son's saber in hand, and walked through the corridors to find his master inside the throne room. Palpatine was disgruntled again, because it seems that, like the first Death Star, there were moles within the Empire. It frustrated him beyond belief. He reasoned, before an advisor told him, that it had to do with a leak about the Death Star's destruction. Sidious was preparing to utilize some of his contingency plans, and seeing Vader was just another addition to his growing joy. The Emperor considered bringing in Operation Cinder, but it was clearly a concentrated problem on Coruscant. Most of this protest was just people outside the old Jedi Temple, rather than throughout the city or the core. The media didn't even know about the Death Star. The walls were closing in though, so seeing the Jedi lightsaber in Vader's hand brought the Emperor some sense of relief. Finally, some good news. The whole week-long journey was a bit frustrating for Palpatine, but he was glad to see that Vader succeeded and remained loyal to him. The Emperor rose from his throne and told his apprentice to walk with him. He started outlining some advancements he planned to make. Starkiller Base and the Final Order were briefly mentioned here. Palpatine was tired of creating entire space stations only for them to be found and destroyed by a couple of fighters. So this time, he was going to utilize Ilum to create the ultimate Death Star, a vessel that could destroy entire star systems at once from across the galaxy. Vader just nodded and followed along. However, outside the Imperial Palace, tensions grew when riot troopers and stormtroopers showed their weapons and told people to go home. The protest, which was arguably really peaceful, transformed into an all-out brawl. The people needed answers. They were being lied to about their loved ones' deaths. As the Emperor and his loyal apprentice walked together, Sidious complimented the lightsaber created by Anakin's son. He mentioned some other ranging thoughts, before eventually blaster fire outside the temple could be heard. The tricky thing is, Vader had been trying to figure out how he would assassinate his master. It was something he was doing throughout their conversation inside the palace, but when the stormtroopers started retreating into the Great Hall, Vader saw his opportunity. This was all in the protection of his son. Sidious turned his head to see the guards running down the corridors towards them. They informed the Emperor that the protesters had turned violent, and some of them took Imperial weapons, others carried their own. Vader looked to his master, and Sidious nodded, giving the order to execute them all. They were rebel sympathizers. The trooper nodded, and rushed towards the gate, where thousands of people were pushing through the doors. Sidious in that moment recognized that they could use this protest to boost Imperial morale. Vader in that same instant, though, shoved his lightsaber off his belt and ignited it at the last second as the red hue bursted through Sidious's chest. He ripped it out and pulled his sun saber into his own hands, and like Anakin had with Dooku, he crossed the blaze around Palpatine's neck and pulled in one swift missile. It was such an unexpected shock for Sidious that he didn't have a time to react. He was left betrayed for the apprentice he trusted more than ever in that moment. Just because Vader was here to save his son, it didn't mean that the darkness was completely gone from him. Any witnesses to Palpatine's death would be instantly murdered, and about 100 civilians would lose their lives at Vader's hand. He used this to claim that he left his master to defend a piece of the temple, before retreating when his emperor was confirmed dead. This would grant Vader immunity within Imperial ranks as he escaped the Imperial Palace. Originally, had the second Death Star caught more traction galaxy-wide, a civil war would have kickstarted on Coruscant. People hated the Emperor with a burning passion. But when he was apparently murdered in cold blood by citizens on the capital, the Coruscant Civil War kicked into overdrive. It was a sign that the voice of the people outweighed the power of the oppressor. So former senators, business people, local leadership, officers, and Masameda would be killed in the uprising that immediately followed the report of the Emperor's death. But Vader himself was not finished. He called out to the Empire, claiming that this horrible day needed to be remembered forever. In a show of strength, he ordered every single major fleet to return back to Coruscant. A major fleet classified in this direct command included any fleet that had a Star Destroyer, so the only fleets left to patrol around the galaxy were light cruisers and corvette-like vessels. The new quote-unquote Emperor would spend the next 48 hours over Coruscant making preparations. Similar to what would have been the celebration following the publicized destruction of the second Death Star, people applauded, cheered, and celebrated Palpatine's death, as news of the second Death Star also got out. But there was a severe amount of tension in the core. The Alliance watched from afar as the Empire gathered almost its entire navy up outside of Coruscant's atmosphere. Lord Vader presented himself on the command deck of the main superstar dreadnought. He gave a motivating speech to the Imperials on deck about the importance of serving the Empire and remaining in power. All the gathered Moffs, Grand Admirals, Generals, and leadership listened with delight, and as he ordered the mass execution of the people on Coruscant, he left the boardroom so that he could begin the assault. The Imperial fleet, which had been gathered up over Coruscant, slowly broke apart. It was a tight formation, one meant to show to the galaxy that the Empire was still united, even after Palpatine's death. The thought behind this gathering of this Imperial fleet was unity, and also to empower the loyal populations. Just as the engines ignited, Vader entered the hangar bay, where several millions of tons worth of rhydonium were stored. The Dark Lord ignited his lightsaber and stabbed the crate closest to him. The explosion ripped outwards. The suit of darkness that Vader wore was swallowed by a burst of light. The explosion, similar to the one that almost destroyed the Republic fleet, was 10 times larger. The rhydonium sent shockwaves outwards, disabling shield generators and ripping through hulls. Not a single ship would survive this. Vader's 48-hour planning included multiple fleets that were protecting rhydonium shipments, so the main stash inside the flagship was just the ignition. The real bomb were the other canister collections in other Star Destroyers. On Mustafar, instead of his bacta tank, Vader smiled under his mask. Part of his preparation included leaving a spare suit inside the flagship and manipulating it with the Force a galaxy away. Most of his power couldn't be used outwards from his suit, so he figured, why not try something new? He spoke through the suit, he physically manipulated it with the Force, and then he destroyed it, but not himself. After overexerting himself, Vader fell limp inside the bacta tank. Without it, or being inside the bacta tank, he likely would have died, but having the monitors and devices to oversee his health, his lungs, heart, food and water intake, he was able to survive the ordeal. Vader, or perhaps now for the first time in forever, Anakin, would find his peace. It wouldn't be instant, and he would be knocked out in a medically induced coma for months. The caretaker droids inside the castle watched over him, and they disposed of the royal guards that Vader killed before entering the bacta tank. Outside of Mustafar, while Vader was taking the big nap, the Empire crumbled. His maneuver, which in the eyes of most tacticians was worthwhile for the propaganda, completely destroyed Imperial morale. They lost more troops in the Raido explosion over Coruscant than the combined death toll of both Death Stars and every single trooper lost since Order 66. It was one of, if not the worst naval disaster in galactic history. It would forever be attached to Darth Vader. But that was the point. Vader immortalized himself as a villain, as someone to hate, someone to unite against. The Emperor always found some sympathy somewhere, for whatever reason. Vader removed any chance for that. His orders and his final message, which top Imperial officers recognized as official orders, were heard galaxy-wide by everyone. The true motivation of the Empire was known to every single citizen in the galaxy, and it turned people against the structure. The New Republic swept in with their undamaged fleet and took the fight to any loyalist. The Rebels or New Republic didn't really even need their cruisers, flagships, or frigates for space battles, because fighter squadrons were more than enough for a couple of light cruisers. Just ask General Syndulla. The rebellion had truly captured the heart of the galaxy, and Luke, with full belief that his father found his peace, began his own hunt for Jedi relics left behind by the Emperor. It wouldn't be until a couple of months into his search that he would trigger a proximity alert. The Emperor had several caches around the galaxy, and one or two of them had alerts that went to Vader's castle, just in case a rogue Jedi found it. Well, after Anakin woke up, he received one of these alerts and immediately sent a transmission to the location. Luke happened to be surfing through the main control panel when his father contacted him. It was a great surprise, and he was genuinely happy to see that Vader survived. Anakin told his son that he was on Mustafar if he wanted to come and retrieve his lightsaber. For a Jedi who had been using a blaster for a couple of months, he would gratefully accept the invitation. Father and son would reunite, months after the fall of the Empire, and they would speak. Luke would learn more about his parents, his grandmother, and the Jedi Order. Anakin was as transparent as possible, even with his own mistakes. He didn't want his son to fall down the same dark path that corrupted him. Luke was thankful for everything, and told his father about his twin sister and the marriage to Han Solo over Sullust. There were some other things mentioned, regarding Yoda and the Lars, but this was the first of many visits that would see their relationship grow. Father and son finally had a chance to build a bond, but Anakin told Luke that he wouldn't ever leave Mustafar. It was his prison, because his death should certify unity in the coming Republic. He couldn't be seen outside of Mustafar. Leia would eventually learn about her father too, and she would never visit him. She forgave him in her own way, but she also couldn't totally forgive him ever, and she never willingly brought herself to see him. The very short memory she had of her mother was too much for Leia to just visit Vader. Padmé deserved a much longer life, one that was filled with joy and prosperity. In that, Leia let go of her anger with her father and left it at that. She also would never permit Ben Solo the opportunity to visit his grandfather. She would eventually agree to allow a few short visits with Luke's oversight in the future. Before any of that could happen though, the New Republic was informed about the Final Order and Starkiller Base. This information, presented by Rebellion hero Luke Skywalker, would save Mon Mothma and Leia from shutting down the Alliance military. The demilitarization package could have hurt the Alliance, but the truth is, even with those potential threats, the Empire would never have the strength to fight back against the New Republic. Vader's actions over Coruscant completely killed off Imperial morale. Nothing would ever bring back the Empire. Vader himself would visit Exegol to ensure the Sith were gone. When he arrived, the temple was destroyed. Since he was no longer a Sith and Palpatine was killed inside the Jedi Temple, the hope for a final order was forever gone. That threat, though, provided the New Republic with security that afforded them protection for years to come. Anakin, while not personally being involved, would have the joy of his life watching his children grow up. He'd meet with Ahsoka in his life once again, and he would continue to build his relationship with Luke and eventually Ben Solo. Young Solo was understanding of his mother's grievances, and he never let her distrust of Anakin hurt his bond with either his mother or grandfather. In a beautiful way, Anakin let go of his anger, and the planet of Mustafar displayed more vegetation. So every time Luke returned to visit his father, he'd see new trees and plants sprouting up from under the castle. It was a very visual tell of his father's change and commitment, not only to saving and protecting his son, but giving up the dark side and becoming a true beacon of of light. And that, my friends, is a pretty wholesome PP story. Special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the wholesome PP. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of take a look at Vader during the Return of the Jedi era, a little bit before, a week before, and see how he would fare with visions similar to what he experienced in before Order 66. And it was really kind of hard to navigate that specifically because I think having those visions would help Vader realize that getting Luke to join him would not save him. I think realistically that's what Vader would just have to recognize, is that after losing his mother, after losing Padme, and then having visions of losing his son, he wouldn't be able to save Luke by just turning him to the dark side or using the dark side, because killing the Tuscans didn't bring Shmi back, killing all the Jedi didn't save Padme. So surely having Luke become a dark acolyte or disciple wouldn't really change any of his fate, or wouldn't change his fate at all. For the dynamic between Palpatine and Vader, I really wanted to kind of do like the rug pull where you expect him to die inside the Death Star, and I didn't really want to kill Palpatine off that early. I thought it'd actually be more interesting in a similar way to how Dooku was told to kill Asajj Ventress, that Palpatine would demand loyalty from Vader to ensure that he was still on his side, and in doing that he would tell Vader to kill Luke. I think that also awards Vader the opportunity to become more of a beacon of light in the story. And then also I wanted to do the rug pull with Vader, where he does the Rhino explosion, similar to that season 5 Clone Wars episode. I think it's the one with Gregor in it, or before Gregor in it, whatever. And that Rhino explosion just multiplied by like 10, just detonating the entire Imperial fleet, which would be a terrible galactic disaster. Not to mention, like, there'd probably be a ton of debris that just goes straight to Coruscant, unless Coruscant like turned into like a ring from Wally or whatever. But anyways, I wanted Vader to kind of survive that and kind of just exist on Mustafar, not really going outwards. As for Leia, it's kind of like a toss-up for me sometimes. Sometimes I want to write her where she forgives him, sometimes I don't. This instance, I just decided that she wouldn't forgive him, but she would that she would forgive him, but she wouldn't want to see him or ever visit him. And I think that's quite fair. And I think it's fair that she also allows Ben to visit. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.